Picture this. A decorated war veteran, a man who served his country with honor for over 2 decades, standing in his own driveway at 6 a.m., watching as HOA board members measure his grass with actual rulers while a tow truck hooks up to his perfectly legal vehicle. The same man who had dodged bullets in Afghanistan was now being treated like a criminal in his own neighborhood for having grass that was allegedly 1/8 of an inch too tall. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. This wasn't just about grass height or parking violations. This was about a power-hungry HOA president who had turned an entire community into her personal kingdom. And she had no idea that she was about to face the most methodical, strategic, and legally devastating takedown in HOA history. Where are you watching from? Please feel free to leave a comment below, because you are about to witness the most satisfying David versus Goliath story you've ever heard. One where the giant falls so hard, the entire neighborhood felt the earthquake. What happened next would make Judge Judy applaud, Dr. Phil nod in approval, and even Steve Wilkos crack a smile. Because when you mess with the wrong person, sometimes karma doesn't just come knocking, it kicks down the door with a search warrant. Meet Marcus Thompson, a 45-year-old retired Army colonel who has spent 22 years serving his country in some of the most challenging environments on Earth. After retiring with full honors, Marcus wanted nothing more than a quiet life in suburbia, with his wife, Sarah, and their 2 teenage children. They had saved every penny for years to buy their dream home in Willowbrook Estates, a picturesque planned community in suburban Phoenix that promised luxury living with community values. The neighborhood looked like something straight out of a magazine. Perfectly manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, and houses that followed a strict but tasteful architectural guideline. The HOA fees were steep at $300 per month. Still, the amenities seemed worth it. A community pool, tennis courts, a clubhouse, and the promise of maintained property values through careful community standards. Marcus had done his due diligence before buying. He'd read every single page of the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, all 247 pages of them. As a military man, he understood the importance of following rules and maintaining standards. He actually appreciated the structure and organization that an HOA could provide. What he didn't anticipate was meeting Patricia Whitmore. Patricia had been the HOA president for 6 years running, and she ruled Willowbrook Estates like it was her personal fiefdom. A 52-year-old real estate agent with too much time on her hands and an insatiable need for control, Patricia had transformed what should have been a simple community organization into something resembling a totalitarian microstate. She had her finger in every aspect of community life. Patricia personally approved every paint color, every landscaping choice, and every exterior modification. She conducted monthly community standards walks, where she would patrol the neighborhood with a clipboard and camera, documenting violations that ranged from reasonable to absolutely ridiculous. But here's what made Patricia particularly dangerous. She was smart. She understood that the key to absolute power in an HOA wasn't breaking rules, it was interpreting them so strictly and creatively that virtually every homeowner was always in violation of something. She had turned the HOA's rule book into a weapon of mass harassment. Now, how does someone like this get elected year after year? The answer is simple: voter apathy and strategic manipulation. Most homeowners in Willowbrook Estates were busy professionals who couldn't be bothered to attend monthly board meetings or election proceedings. Patricia made sure these meetings were scheduled at inconvenient times and provided minimal advance notice. She also had a core group of 3 other board members who were either intimidated by her or benefited from her protection. The current board consisted of Patricia as president, her next-door neighbor Janet Morrison as vice president, Patricia's tennis partner Susan Lee as treasurer, and a rotating cast of reluctant secretaries who typically resigned within 6 months of joining. It was essentially Patricia's personal cabinet, rubber-stamping her increasingly authoritarian interpretations of community standards. When Marcus first moved in, he made the mistake that many new residents make. He introduced himself to Patricia and expressed genuine interest in community involvement. Patricia's eyes lit up like she'd found a new toy. Here was a military man who clearly understood discipline and order. She immediately began testing his compliance with increasingly petty requests and observations. But stay with me, because what Patricia didn't understand was that military discipline cuts both ways. Marcus hadn't spent 2 decades in the army without learning how to identify a petty tyrant, and more importantly, how to systematically dismantle their power structure. The first warning sign came during Marcus's second week in the neighborhood. He received a formal HOA violation notice for having his garbage bins visible from the street for more than 30 minutes after collection. The fine was $50, and the letter was written in the kind of bureaucratic language typically reserved for federal court documents. Marcus studied the violation notice with the same attention he'd once given to military intelligence reports. The notice cited Section 12.47 of the HOA covenants, which indeed stated that garbage receptacles should not be visible from public right-of-ways, except on designated collection days between the hours of 6 p.m. the evening before and 10 a.m. the morning of collection. Here's where it gets interesting. Marcus had been deployed overseas enough times to know the value of detailed record-keeping. He immediately began documenting everything. He installed security cameras, started keeping a daily log of his activities, and began photographing every single HOA communication he received. What he discovered over the next few weeks was that Patricia's enforcement of HOA rules was anything but consistent. Some neighbors seemed to violate rules with impunity, while others received violation notices for the most minor infractions. Marcus began to see a pattern emerging, and it wasn't pretty. The harassment campaign against Marcus escalated with surgical precision. Patricia seemed to have made it her personal mission to find fault with everything he did, and her methods were both creative and infuriating. 2 weeks after the garbage bin incident, Marcus received another violation notice. This time it was for inappropriate landscaping maintenance scheduling. Apparently, Marcus had committed the grievous sin of mowing his lawn at 7:15 a.m. on a Saturday. The HOA covenants specified that power equipment could not be operated before 8 a.m. on weekends. Marcus checked his security footage and confirmed that yes, he had indeed started mowing at 7:15 a.m. But here's what made his blood boil. The same security cameras showed his next-door neighbor firing up a leaf blower at 6:45 a.m. the same morning. When Marcus filed a complaint about this inconsistent enforcement, Patricia's response was a masterclass in bureaucratic doublespeak. She claimed that leaf blowers produced less noise than lawn mowers and therefore fell under a different subsection of the noise ordinance. When Marcus pointed out that the covenant language made no such distinction and referred to power equipment, Patricia scheduled a board meeting to clarify the interpretation of noise-related violations. But here's where Patricia made her first major tactical error. She underestimated Marcus's attention to detail. Marcus didn't just attend that board meeting. He came prepared with audio recordings, decibel measurements, and a presentation that would have made his old Pentagon briefing officers proud. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse on a Tuesday at 7 p.m. Only 12 residents bothered to show up, which was typical. Patricia clearly expected to rubber stamp her new interpretation and move on with her evening. Instead, she found herself facing a retired military officer who had done more homework than she had. Marcus presented his case with clinical precision. He had documented noise levels from various types of power equipment used throughout the neighborhood. He had timestamps and video evidence of inconsistent enforcement. He had researched legal precedents for HOA rule interpretation and had even consulted with a lawyer friend about discriminatory enforcement practices. The other board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats as Marcus dismantled Patricia's argument piece by piece. By the end of his presentation, it was clear to everyone in the room that Patricia's enforcement practices were arbitrary at best and potentially discriminatory at worst. Patricia's face grew redder with each point Marcus made, but she maintained her composure. She thanked Marcus for his thorough research and promised that the board would take his concerns under advisement. The meeting was adjourned without any resolution, but Marcus could see that he had rattled Patricia's cage. What happened next proved that Patricia was more vindictive than Marcus had initially realized. Over the following month, Marcus received violation notices at an increasingly ridiculous pace. His mailbox was allegedly positioned 2 inches too far from the curb. His house numbers were supposedly the wrong shade of black. His driveway showed signs of premature weathering that detracted from community aesthetics. Each violation came with a $50 fine, and Patricia made it clear that unpaid fines would result in liens against the property. Marcus was facing hundreds of dollars in penalties for violations that ranged from questionable to completely fabricated. But the harassment wasn't limited to violation notices. Patricia began conducting what she called enhanced community standards inspections that focused heavily on Marcus's property. She would show up with her clipboard and camera at different times throughout the week, sometimes bringing other board members or neighbors who she claimed were concerned about property values. Now remember that Marcus had spent years dealing with hostile environments and adversarial relationships. He recognized Patricia's tactics for what they were, an attempt to force him into either compliance or departure. She was trying to make his life so miserable that he would either fall in line or sell his house and leave. Marcus's wife, Sarah, was getting frustrated with the constant harassment, and their teenagers were embarrassed by the attention their family was receiving. The kids' friends were starting to ask questions about why there was always some drama at the Thompson house. This is where Marcus made a decision that would change everything. Instead of backing down or moving away, he decided to fight back using the same systematic approach that had made him successful in the military. He was going to take Patricia down, but he was going to do it completely within the bounds of HOA rules and legal procedures. Marcus began his counteroffensive by becoming the most informed HOA member in the history of Willowbrook Estates. He didn't just read the covenants, he studied them like they were classified military documents. He researched Arizona state law regarding HOA governance. He obtained copies of the community's budget, meeting minutes and violation records going back 5 years. What he discovered was shocking. Patricia hadn't just been selectively enforcing rules, she had been systematically mismanaging HOA finances, conducting meetings in violation of state open meeting laws, and creating her own interpretations of covenants without proper board approval. But Marcus knew that information without a strategy was useless. He needed to wait for the right moment and the right issue to launch his campaign. That moment came when Patricia made her biggest mistake yet. Marcus received a violation notice that was so ridiculous, so clearly fabricated, and so obviously discriminatory that it gave him the legal ammunition he needed to destroy Patricia's credibility once and for all. The violation was for inappropriate vehicle display. According to Patricia's notice, Marcus's pickup truck, which was parked legally in his own driveway, violated community standards because it was commercial in nature and detracted from the residential aesthetic of the neighborhood. Here's the thing about Marcus's truck. It was a standard Ford F-150, identical to trucks owned by at least 6 other residents in the community. The only difference was a small magnetic decal on the door that read U.S. Army Veteran with a modest flag graphic. Patricia was essentially fining Marcus for displaying his military service, and she had just handed him the kind of public relations nightmare that would make national news. Marcus stared at the violation notice for a full minute, feeling a cold rage that he hadn't experienced since his combat days. Patricia had finally crossed a line that would allow him to destroy her completely, and she had no idea what was about to hit her. The violation notice demanded that Marcus either remove the commercial signage from his vehicle or face escalating fines that would start at $100 and double every week until compliance was achieved. The letter gave him exactly 7 days to respond. Marcus spent those 7 days preparing for the most comprehensive tactical strike of his civilian life. He wasn't just going to fight this one violation. He was going to systematically expose every aspect of Patricia's corrupt administration and force a complete overhaul of the HOA board. His first move was to research every single violation notice Patricia had issued over the past 2 years. Using Arizona's public records laws and his own detailed documentation, Marcus built a database that revealed a pattern of discriminatory enforcement that was both shocking and legally actionable. The numbers told a damning story. Patricia had issued 247 violation notices over 24 months. Of those, 89 were issued to just 12 homeowners. Coincidentally, the same 12 homeowners who had either questioned her authority at board meetings or failed to support her re-election campaigns. The remaining 158 violations were scattered among the other 200-plus homes in the community, with many longtime residents receiving 0 violations, despite obvious non-compliance with various rules. Even more damaging was Marcus's analysis of Patricia's own property and that of her inner circle. Janet Morrison, the vice president, had been running an unlicensed dog grooming business out of her garage for 3 years, in direct violation of the community's restrictions on home businesses. Susan Lee, the treasurer, had installed a hot tub without architectural approval and had painted her front door a color that was ent on the approved palette. Patricia's own violations were the most egregious. She had converted her garage into a home office for her real estate business, complete with client meetings and multiple vehicles parked on the street daily. Her backyard fence exceeded height restrictions. Her landscaping included non-approved plant species, and she had installed decorative lighting that violated the community's dark sky ordinances. But Marcus knew that documenting hypocrisy wouldn't be enough. He needed to expose actual legal violations that could result in Patricia's removal from the board and potential criminal charges. That's when Marcus discovered the financial irregularities. Using his background in military logistics and budget management, Marcus analyzed 5 years of HOA financial records and found discrepancies that made his stomach turn. Patricia had been systematically inflating maintenance contracts by awarding jobs to companies that charged premium rates but delivered substandard work. Marcus discovered that the community's landscaping contract was 40% higher than comparable services in neighboring communities, and Patricia's brother-in-law owned the company performing the work. The pool maintenance contract told a similar story. The company charged $8,000 per month for services that should have cost no more than $4,500, and the owner was a former client of Patricia's real estate business who had received significant discounts on property transactions. Most damaging of all, Marcus uncovered evidence that Patricia had been using HOA funds to pay for her own legal expenses in disputes with homeowners. Over $15,000 in community money had been spent on attorney fees that were directly related to Patricia's personal vendettas against residents who had challenged her authority. Marcus compiled all of this evidence into a presentation that would have impressed his old intelligence officers. He had financial records, email correspondence, photographs, audio recordings, and legal precedents all organized into an absolutely airtight case. But Marcus wasn't ready to present his evidence yet. He had one more strategic move to make, and it was going to be brilliant. Marcus decided to attend the next HOA board meeting and formally contest his vehicle violation in front of the entire community. But he didn't just invite his neighbors. He invited the local media. Marcus reached out to Channel 12 News, the Arizona Republic, and 3 local radio stations with an irresistible story pitch. Decorated war veteran fined by HOA for displaying military service decal. The story was picked up immediately. News crews arrived at the board meeting along with representatives from several veterans organizations who had heard about Marcus's situation and wanted to show support. Patricia walked into what she thought would be a routine board meeting and found herself facing news cameras, a room packed with angry residents, and a decorated war hero who was about to destroy her credibility in front of the entire community systematically. Marcus's presentation lasted 45 minutes and covered every aspect of Patricia's misconduct. He presented his evidence with the precision of a prosecutor and the authority of someone who had briefed generals and congressmen. He started with the discriminatory enforcement patterns, showing side-by-side photographs of violations that were ignored for some residents while others were fined. He demonstrated the financial irregularities with charts and graphs that made the corruption impossible to deny. He played audio recordings of Patricia threatening residents with liens and legal action for questioning her authority. The coup de grace was Marcus's documentation of Patricia's own violations. He had photographs, measurements, and timestamps that proved Patricia had violated more HOA rules than any other resident in the community's history, while simultaneously fining others for identical infractions. By the time Marcus finished his presentation, Patricia was visibly shaking. Several residents were openly calling for her resignation, and the news cameras had captured every moment of her public humiliation. But Patricia made one final mistake that sealed her fate completely. Instead of accepting responsibility or attempting to address Marcus's evidence, she became defensive and hostile. She accused Marcus of harassment, questioned his motives, and suggested that his military background made him unsuitable for civilian community life. The room erupted. Veterans in the audience were furious, other residents were shouting, and the news cameras caught every second of Patricia's meltdown. In trying to defend herself, she had just committed political suicide on live television. Marcus sat quietly through Patricia's tirade, taking notes and maintaining the kind of calm demeanor that had served him well in combat situations. When Patricia finished her rant, Marcus stood up and delivered a response that would be quoted in news reports for weeks. He thanked Patricia for confirming that she had no intention of addressing the evidence of financial mismanagement and discriminatory enforcement. He announced that he would be filing complaints with the Arizona Department of Real Estate regarding Patricia's potential license violations, the State Attorney General's office regarding the financial irregularities, and the IRS regarding potential tax implications of the misused HOA funds. Then Marcus delivered his final blow. He announced that he had obtained enough signatures from community residents to call for a special election to recall the entire board, and that he would be running for HOA president on a platform of transparency, accountability, and equal enforcement of community standards. The meeting ended with Patricia storming out of the clubhouse, followed by news crews asking questions she refused to answer. The entire confrontation was broadcast on the evening news, and video clips went viral on social media. The aftermath of Marcus's presentation was swift and decisive. Within 48 hours, Patricia's public humiliation had spread far beyond the local news cycle. The story was picked up by national veterans organizations, social media influencers, and news outlets across the country who were fascinated by the tale of an HOA president who had essentially declared war on a decorated military veteran. The coverage was devastating for Patricia. Her real estate license came under investigation after multiple complaints were filed regarding her use of HOA resources for personal business activities. The Arizona Attorney General's office launched an inquiry into the financial irregularities Marcus had documented. Most damaging of all, the IRS began examining whether Patricia's misuse of HOA funds constituted tax fraud. But the legal consequences were just the beginning. Patricia's reputation in the community was destroyed. Neighbors who had been afraid to speak out against her for years suddenly found their voices. Stories emerged of Patricia's harassment campaigns against elderly residents, young families, and anyone who had dared to question her authority. The recall election was scheduled for 6 weeks after Marcus's presentation, but Patricia didn't wait for the results. Facing mounting legal pressure and community opposition, she submitted her resignation as HOA president 2 weeks before the vote. Janet Morrison and Susan Lee followed suit within days, effectively dissolving the entire board that had enabled Patricia's reign of terror. Marcus was elected as the new HOA president by the largest voter turnout in Willowbrook Estate's history. His first act was to implement a complete overhaul of the community's governance structure, including term limits for board members, transparent financial reporting, and standardized enforcement procedures that would prevent future discrimination. But the changes Marcus implemented went far beyond simple rule adjustments. He established a community mediation program to resolve disputes before they escalated to violations. He created a budget oversight committee that included an independent financial review of all major expenses. Most importantly, he instituted a policy that required all enforcement actions to be reviewed by at least 2 board members before any fines could be issued. The financial impact of Patricia's mismanagement was staggering. Marcus's investigation revealed that she had cost the community over $150,000 in unnecessary expenses, inflated contracts, and legal fees over her 6-year tenure. The new board was able to renegotiate service contracts and recover a significant portion of these funds, resulting in a reduction of HOA fees from $300 to $225 per month. Marcus also discovered that Patricia had been systematically suppressing property values through her aggressive enforcement policies. Multiple real estate agents confirmed that Willowbrook Estates had developed a reputation as a community to avoid due to HOA harassment. Under Marcus's leadership, property values began to recover as word spread about the management changes. The media attention continued for months after Patricia's resignation. Marcus was invited to speak at HOA reform conferences across the country, sharing his story as an example of how homeowners could effectively combat corrupt community leadership. He was featured in articles about veterans' rights, HOA abuse, and community activism. The most satisfying outcome for Marcus was the transformation of Willowbrook Estates from a community ruled by fear into a neighborhood where families genuinely wanted to live. Children started playing in the streets again without fear of generating noise complaints. Neighbors began talking to each other instead of avoiding eye contact. Community events that had been poorly attended during Patricia's regime were suddenly drawing hundreds of participants. Marcus served 2 terms as HOA president before stepping down to focus on his consulting business, helping other communities reform their governance structures. His approach became known as the Thompson method, a systematic approach to documenting problems, building coalitions, and implementing sustainable solutions. The Thompson method has been used successfully in over 200 communities across the United States, helping homeowners take back control from corrupt or incompetent HOA boards. Marcus's documentation techniques and strategic approach have become standard practice for homeowner advocacy groups nationwide. As for Patricia, the consequences of her actions continued long after her resignation. Her real estate license was suspended for 2 years due to violations related to her HOA activities. She faced significant financial penalties from both state and federal investigations. Most damaging of all, her reputation in the Phoenix area real estate community was permanently destroyed. Patricia eventually moved to a different state and attempted to start over in a new career, but the internet never forgets. Her name became synonymous with HOA abuse, and her story serves as a cautionary tale for anyone who believes they can use community positions to harass and intimidate their neighbors. The legal precedents established by Marcus's case have been cited in HOA disputes across the country. Courts now regularly reference the Willowbrook Estates case when addressing issues of discriminatory enforcement, financial mismanagement, and board member accountability. Marcus's victory had implications far beyond his own community. It demonstrated that even the most entrenched HOA corruption could be defeated through careful documentation, strategic planning, and community organizing. His success inspired thousands of other homeowners to stand up against abusive HOA practices in their own neighborhoods. Today, Marcus continues to live in Willowbrook Estates with his family, enjoying the peaceful community life he had originally sought. His house still displays the same American flag decal that Patricia had tried to ban, now serving as a symbol of victory over petty tyranny. The community clubhouse features a plaque honoring Marcus's service, both to his country and to his neighborhood. It reads, "Dedicated to Colonel Marcus Thompson, who proved that the principles of honor, courage, and commitment that serve our nation also serve our communities. But the most powerful testament to Marcus's victory is the transformation he brought to hundreds of other communities through his advocacy work. The ripple effects of his confrontation with Patricia Whitmore continue to protect homeowners from HOA abuse across the nation. So what can we learn from Marcus Thompson's incredible journey from harassment victim to community hero? The answer is both simple and profound. When good people are willing to stand up against petty tyrants, justice doesn't just prevail, it transforms entire communities. Marcus's story proves that you don't have to be a military officer to fight back against corruption and abuse. You need to be willing to do the work, document everything, and never give up on the principle that all people deserve to be treated with dignity and respect in their own homes. The next time you're facing an impossible situation, remember Colonel Marcus Thompson standing in his driveway at 6 a.m., watching HOA board members measure his grass with rulers. He could have backed down, moved away, or accepted the harassment as the price of home ownership. Instead, he chose to fight back with intelligence, determination, and an unwavering commitment to justice. And in doing so, he didn't just save his own family from harassment. He created a blueprint that has helped thousands of other families reclaim their rights and their peace of mind. Because sometimes, when David faces Goliath, David doesn't just win, he changes the rules of the game forever. What would you have done in Marcus's situation? Would you have had the courage to stand up against that kind of systematic harassment, or would you have looked for an easier path? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, your voice matters, whether you're fighting an HOA board or any other form of institutional bullying. The power to create change has always been in the hands of ordinary people willing to do extraordinary things. Marcus Thompson proved that beyond any doubt.